Welcome to this lecturette on forming a practice-based question. Recall that evidence-based practice is a process that begins with forming a practice-based question. That question is then researched, options are appraised, and the intervention is applied. So let's discuss how you come up with a practice-based question in the first place. Practice-based questions are developed with consideration of the client characteristics, the intervention and alternative interventions, and desired outcomes. In thinking about formulating a question, consider the different types of practice questions you could ask. Let's think about a problem like school push-out, which is when an unwelcoming school environment and over-reliance on zero-tolerance policies ends up disproportionately pushing out poor and minority students. Push-out has been demonstrated to have a lot of enduring consequences like poor academic performance, juvenile justice involvement, and poor employment outcomes. So one type of practice-based question we could examine would be to look at predictors of particular outcomes, like risk or protective factors that predict outcomes in school. We could ask if school overcrowding contributes to push-out of African American girls in secondary schools. And see, there we actually tried to hone in and get some specificity in terms of the particular population that we wanted to look at and the age range. We could also ask a question about assessment, like what assessment tool best identifies levels of social support for students aged 12 to 16. See, we're specific on that question too in terms of the age range. We could look at client experiences and ask, how do students of color, those with disabilities, or LGBT youth assign meaning to their suspension or their expulsion in terms of effects on them and their communities? Finally, we could ask about effectiveness of particular interventions, like school administrators. If they were to track instances of exclusionary discipline so that schools could be held accountable for its use, does that reduce the racial disparities in push-out? So try to think about questions that are narrow enough to be manageable, but not so narrow that there's not enough literature available on them. You might need to refine your question as you find out what research is out there. In this course, you're going to be developing the question as a team. So each member of the team should be brainstorming about ideas of interest. Once y'all share ideas and start to hone in on shared interests, you can search the literature and refine your question a bit. Then your team will develop a problem statement that describes the problem and clearly states the question. This is the first part of your KFP assignment and will be turned in as a team. The problem statement should address the population. Who is affected by this problem? Is it children, adults, person with disabilities, or some other group? What is the domain of the problem? Like, what's the general problem area? Is it about poverty or substance use or post-traumatic stress? Be sure to define any key terms that the reader needs to understand so that they know what you're talking about. What's the scope and prevalence of the problem? Basically, how many people does it affect? That's sometimes a good piece of information to use as your hook. Your hook engages the reader right out front in the problem statement. Then you lay out what's known or not known about the problem, basically stating the nature of it in terms of contexts and dynamics. That will be a fairly brief part in this first set of the part of the KFP, and then you'll plump that up in your KFP part 2 when you turn it in the second part as a team. So you first do this brief problem statement. The later problem statement is where you really develop the literature review. Finally, you address the significance of the problem. Why do we care? What happens if the problem isn't addressed? And why is it important to social workers? Your problem statement leads to your practice-based question, which you can address any one of those 4 things that we just talked about: prediction, assessment, client experiences, or effectiveness of interventions. So what I would like you to do now is get those wheels in your head turning and start generating some ideas about where you'd like to go with this. It's important to find something that you're actually interested in because you're going to be working on it over the course of the semester, and you'll be presenting it to the class and to me, so we're excited to find out more about the things y'all dig into. Thanks for joining me on this lecturette.